Hello, welcome back to this little corner of the internet. It's that time of year again, folks. It is, believe it or not, more than halfway through the year of 2023, and so I think it is generally a booktube custom to do the mid-year freakout tag, which I will be doing today. I've seen a couple versions of this tag floating around, but I will link to where I got my questions for this tag in the doobly-doo below, so if you would like to replicate this video, feel free. But with that, let's talk about the books that I have read so far this year and how I'm feeling about my reading year so far. So the first question of this tag is, how much have you been reading? And as of filming this, I have read 65 books so far this year, and we are about halfway through July when I'm filming this. I feel like I've been reading a lot this year, but mainly in spurts. I'll have periods of time where I'm reading a whole lot, and then periods where I kind of back off a little bit and might have a week or two where I don't read anything. I also find myself in the midst of quite a few books at the moment. I feel like I have been kind of sporadic as far as choosing which books I want to read next, and sort of looking back and reflecting on my reading habits this year. I think I've had a habit of getting kind of distracted by the new shiny book in my purview over here, and that may not even be a new release. It might just be, oh, my library has this book, I think I might want to read it, or oh, it's, I have this on Hoopla, I can listen to it while I'm commuting in on the train, or oh, this will be a really quick read, it's a comic book. And that is all well and good, but I think for the second half of this year, one of my goals is to be a bit more intentional about what I'm reading, a little bit more focused, sort of rein in the number of books that I'm currently reading, which as of filming this, I think it's around 15. I think part of the reading distraction that I've sort of experienced this year, one has been in part the library and the Hoopla app, but also I think a big part of it has been becoming a reviewer on NetGalley, where I get to review books before they're published, which is a big honor. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to do so, but I have definitely found myself sort of chasing the new shiny book thing when I have made copious numbers of lists of books that I already own that I really need to and want to get to. So as I was mentioning, goal for the second half of the year is to sort of pivot from my reading stance for the first half of the year and refocus in on the TBRs that I made for myself, refocus in on the books that I already own that I'm trying to read that have been on my shelf for several years, and sort of honor the reason why I decided to do a no-buy year this year for books, because I have way too many unread books on my shelf. So that is sort of my overall sentiment feeling on how my reading has been going so far this year. A bit chaotic, a bit all over the place, good, but we're gonna change things up for the second half. The second question in this tag is, what have you been reading? And so I'm gonna use my Storygraph account for this. It has a nice little statistics area, and so I will insert some graphics over on this side of the screen. According to Storygraph, the mood graph that they provide based on what you've been reading is, apparently I've been reading mainly things that have been reflective, emotional, lighthearted and dark, and mysterious, which is kind of a departure from what I generally have tended to read in the past couple of years. The reflective mood is quite a bit higher than I think it generally is for me, which is kind of cool to see. I definitely feel like I have been reading a lot more internal narratives that are very reflective or self-reflective, which has been really cool. I've been reading a lot of short books, not just graphic novels and comics, although there have been quite a few of those. But I've read a number of books this year that have been, 200 pages or less, which is kind of new for me. I don't really see this graph or statistic as one way or the other. A book is a book to me, but I think it's just interesting to sort of look at my reading habits as far as the length of the books that I have been consuming. Next up we have the genre graph. Now, I do kind of take issue with how Storygraph categorizes the genres here. And I don't think I'm the only one. I've heard a couple of other people sort of take note of this. For example, I don't see graphic novels or comics to be a genre. Those are formats of books. Same thing with LGBTQIA+. That's not a genre. It could be a subject or a theme. I digress. But according to Storygraph, the top quote-unquote genres that I have been reading outside of the ones that I don't count as genres are first being historical, second being fantasy, third being romance, fourth being memoir, fifth being literary, and sixth being classics. Now, I will make a note that the romance theme, I haven't been reading very many strictly romance books. I think I've read 3 or 4 so far this year, but there have been books that I've read that have had romance as sort of a background plot, which I find interesting that Storygraph would categorize that as sort of the main theme, but again, I digress. The third question for this tag is best book that you have read so far this year. And for me, I think it's definitely going to be a toss-up between No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood, which I continue to talk about, and Just Kids by Patti Smith. Both were incredibly deeply affecting to me when I read them for different reasons. If you would like to hear me talk about both of these books a bit more in depth, I will link the reading vlog that I made when I was reading these books. Question number 4, new releases that you haven't read yet but want to. So there was a book that I had hoped to request to review on NetGalley but didn't get around to it, but I would still really love to read it eventually, and that is Monsters: A Fan's Dilemma by Claire Dederer. This came out this past April, and I'll read you a quote of what the New York Times wrote about it. A timely, passionate, provocative, blisteringly smart interrogation of how we make and experience art in the age of cancel culture and the link between genius and monstrosity. Can we love the work of controversial classic and contemporary artists, but dislike the artist? So I think this is going to be a very poignant and very interesting book. And I think so far I have heard good things about it from people who have already read it. Question number 5 is most anticipated book released for the second half of the year, and because I am extra and could not have chosen one, I have chosen 3, and I'll tell you about them. First is a nonfiction book, Art Monsters: Unruly Bodies in Feminist Art by Lauren Elkin. This comes out November 14th with Farrar, Stratus, and Giroux, I think is how you pronounce that publisher's name. But this book reportedly examines the kinds of connections that there might be between art and monstrosity, and how that dynamic can change when that artist is a woman. The next book that I am very much excited for is Nightside of the River: Ghost Stories by Jeanette Winterson. This comes out October 24th with Grove Atlantic Press. And one of my favorite books that I read last year was her short story collection centered around Christmas, and surprisingly there were quite a number of ghost stories in that collection. So I'm really interested to see what she does with this collection. Obviously it's coming out in October. I don't think it's a stretch to say that this is likely going to be a spooky ghost story collection, more along the themes of Halloween. And the third and final book that I am really chomping at the bit to have come out for the second half of the year is Wondrous Transformations: A Maverick Physician, The Science of Hormones and the Birth of the Transgender Revolution by Allison Lee. This comes out September 26th. This is a nonfiction book as well, and it is a biography of Harry Benjamin, who was a German endocrinologist who was a very pivotal figure in the development of modern transgender medicine and gender-affirming care. Number 6, a book that's out of your comfort zone. Now, I'm not sure if this is asking if there's a book that I've read so far this year that has been out of my comfort zone, or if I have plans to read one later in the year. There was a book that I picked up earlier this year that at the time felt like it was a bit outside of my usual comfort zone, and that was We Had to Remove This Post by Hannah Bervoet, I think is how you say her name, I'm sorry. This was a very unsettling literary fiction about the mindfuck that is social media, and specifically social media moderation, how the standards for it are nebulous and ever-changing, and how the constant exposure to horrific things on the internet can really warp the human psyche and personality. It follows a group of content moderators for an unnamed social media corporation and follows their downward spiral, so to speak. This book was certainly out of my comfort zone content-wise. It was pretty unsettling. There are, I would say, content warnings for just about anything you can imagine. Overall, in the end, I think I did appreciate the reading experience. It's not a book that I think I would like to revisit, but I am glad that I read it, and I'm glad for I appreciate the dialogue that it opened for me, looking at social media at this sort of new angle. Question number 7 is biggest surprise, and for me I feel like the biggest surprise or sleeper hit for me this year has been the graphic novel M is for Monster by Talia Dutton. This is a really fantastic young adult graphic novel. The story definitely has elements that are very similar to Frankenstein, but the narrative then sort of takes those elements and uses them to touch on a number of anxieties and fears that are common in the trans and queer communities, especially for children and young adults who are part of those communities. And I think it definitely played with these themes and these emotions in a very subtle but heartfelt way that I found just really wonderful. It's a graphic novel that I don't think I expected to love as much as I did, but it's one that is definitely sticking with me several months after having read it. And I would definitely pick up a copy for myself and possibly someone else when I am off of my book buying ban. Question number 8, new favorite author. I'd say I found a few authors that I am definitely into at the moment that I definitely want to check out more of their work. I'm waiting to give them the title of new favorite, but they definitely have potential. The first being Francois Sagan, author of Bonjour Tristesse and A Certain Smile, both of which I have read this year. Both were wonderfully devastating and also so sharp. I definitely have my critiques of Sagan's work from a modern perspective when it comes to things like gender, privilege, and feminism for sure. However, I couldn't help but overall be really impressed with both of the books that I have read by her, and I am intrigued and really interested to check out more of her work. Next is definitely Patricia Lockwood, author of No One Is Talking About This, which again I have talked so much about, but she also has a memoir out called Priest Daddy that I would really like to read. And I think she also has a poetry collection out as well, which I should check out, but I think she's a fairly new author as far as not having a super large catalog, so I will definitely be picking up anything that she puts out in the future. And then finally, we have Shannon Hale, author of The Goose Girl and Enna Burning, both of which I read this year and both of which I really loved. Shannon Hale's work is really reminiscent of a lot of the young adult fantasy books that I was reading and devouring when I was of that age, and apparently it's still a style that I really love. Both of these are fantastic young adult fantasy books. They are part of a series following different protagonists for each book. The first one is a fairy tale retelling of the story of the Goose Girl. I don't believe any of the other books in this series follow fairy tales, but they are set in the same world, and I'll for sure be checking out more of the books in this series later on in the year as well. Question number 9, underrated gems that you've read recently. Both of these I suppose are underrated because they've only just come out a couple weeks ago, but A Life of One's Own, 9 Women Writers Begin Again by Joanna Biggs, and Arrangements in Blue, Notes on Loving and Living Alone by Amy Key are both fantastic memoir essay collections. I read and reviewed both of these for NetGalley, and I talked about them both a bit more in depth in a recent video, which I will link up in the cards if you would like to check out. And the final question in this tag is books to read by the end of the year. And basically every TBR list that I have made for this year I have yet to tackle in any capacity. So once I get through a final cluster of things that I need to read and review for NetGalley in the coming weeks, I definitely plan to dive headlong into all of the physical books that are on my shelf that I've made TBRs of to read for this year. If you're interested in what those books are, I will link the subsequent TBR videos that I made about those lists up in the cards down below, wherever you would like. But I think that is it, my friends. That is going to be my, I was about to say midlife crisis, mid-year freakout tag. I hope you all are doing well. Let me know how your reading years have been going in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up. I really appreciate it. And if you would like to see more from me, feel free to subscribe and stick around. But for now, that is all from me, folks. I hope you are doing well, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.